The fire had long since died, leaving only ash and the memory of warmth. Elena Hart knelt beside the cold hearth, her fingers blackened with soot as she scraped together what little remained of the wood she had burned 3 nights before. The cabin walls groaned under the weight of another storm, wind howling through gaps in the timber like the screams of something dying. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did nothing against the cold that had settled into her bones, the kind of cold that came not from winter, but from hunger, from exhaustion, from a life that had never known mercy. 23 years. 23 years of survival in a world that had decided before her first breath that she was worth nothing. The kingdom of Silvercrest stretched vast and powerful beyond the forest that surrounded her small dwelling, a realm of silver towers and ancient bloodlines, where wolves ran beneath the full moon and kings ruled with iron claws. But Elena had never been part of that world. She had been born on its edges, in the dirt and shadows where the unwanted were left to rot. Her mother had died bringing her into the world. That was the first thing anyone ever told her about herself, as if the act of being born had been her original sin. Her father, a low-ranking wolf with no name worth remembering, had looked at the squalling infant and seen only the reason his mate was gone. He had left her on the steps of a healer's cottage before the sun rose on her second day of life. And Elena had grown up knowing that even the man who gave her life had not wanted her to keep it. The healer, an old woman named Marta, had taken her in not out of kindness but out of obligation. In Silvercrest, even the abandoned had to be accounted for, registered, marked as property of the territory, even if they were worth less than the livestock. Marta had been stern and silent, teaching Elena the names of herbs and the properties of roots, not because she cared whether the girl learned, but because she needed an extra pair of hands. By the time Elena was 7, she could identify nightshade from belladonna in the dark, could brew a fever-reducing tea with her eyes closed, could set a broken bone and stitch a wound without flinching. Marta had died when Elena was 15. No ceremony, no mourning, just a body that stopped breathing in the night, and a girl who woke to find herself alone. The village elders had come to the cottage, counted the stores of medicine, and told Elena she could stay as long as she continued to provide the healing services the territory required. They did not ask if she wanted to. They did not offer payment. They simply expected obedience, as they always had. And Elena had learned long ago that resistance only brought pain. So she had stayed. 8 years in that cabin. 8 years of mixing salves and delivering tonics to wolves who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Invisible. Irrelevant. She was Omega, the lowest rank. A wolf so weak, her shift had never fully come. She could feel the pull of the moon, could sense the presence of other wolves, but her body remained stubbornly human, as if even her animal side had rejected her. In a kingdom where strength was everything, where power determined worth, Elena was nothing. The villagers treated her with the kind of casual cruelty reserved for things they did not consider fully alive. They came to her when they were injured or ill, demanded remedies and care, but they never thanked her. They never paid her. They took what they needed and left. And if she dared to ask for anything in return, for food or coin or even basic respect, they laughed. Sometimes they did worse than laugh. Elena had scars across her back from the time she had spoken out of turn to a beta's wife, thin white lines that ached when the weather turned cold. She had a crooked finger on her left hand from when a village boy had slammed the door on it after she had healed his broken arm, punishment for the crime of touching him without permission. She had learned to keep her eyes down, her voice soft, her presence as small as possible. She had learned that survival meant swallowing every insult, every indignity, every moment of humiliation, because the alternative was death. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the roof with a violence that made Elena flinch. She had no food left. The last of the dried meat had been eaten 2 days ago, and the bread had gone to mold before that. She had a small store of root vegetables buried in the cold cellar, but they were meant for winter, and it was only autumn. If she used them now, she would have nothing when the snow came. But if she did not eat soon, she would be too weak to work, and if she could not work, the elders would declare her useless and cast her out entirely. She rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her, and moved to the small wooden table where she kept her supplies. Jars of herbs lined the shelves above, each one carefully labeled in Marta's spidery handwriting. Chamomile for calming, valerian for sleep, arnica for bruises, willow bark for pain. Elena knew them all by heart, knew their uses and dosages and dangers, but none of them could cure hunger. None of them could fill the hollow ache in her stomach or the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. A sudden noise outside made her freeze. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the wet leaves. Elena's heart lurched into her throat. No one came to her cabin after dark unless something was wrong, unless someone was injured or dying. But the footsteps did not sound hurried. They sounded purposeful, measured, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. The door burst open with a crash, and 3 men stepped inside without invitation. Elena recognized them immediately. Village guards, low-ranking enforcers who answered to the beta in charge of the outlying territories. They were broad-shouldered and cruel-eyed, the kind of men who enjoyed the small amount of power they wielded over those weaker than themselves. The tallest one, a man named Garrett, grinned at her with too many teeth. "Evening, herbalist," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "We've got a problem, and you're going to fix it." Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. "What kind of problem?" "The beta's son got into a fight down at the tavern. Idiot got himself stabbed. You're going to patch him up. I'll need to see the wound," Elena said quietly. "If it's deep, he should go to the pack healer in the main village." "He's not going anywhere," Garrett interrupted, his grin fading into something harder. "The beta doesn't want anyone knowing his precious boy was brawling drunk in a common tavern. You fix him here, you keep your mouth shut, and maybe we don't tell the elders you've been hoarding medicine that belongs to the pack." Elena's stomach dropped. "I'm not hoarding anything. Everything I have, I made myself. That's not what we'll tell them." The second guard, a shorter man with a scar across his cheek, stepped closer. "You help us. We help you. You refuse. And we make sure the council knows you've been stealing pack resources." It was a lie, and they all knew it. But truth did not matter in Silvercrest. Not for someone like Elena. If the guards accused her, the elders would believe them, because they were ranked wolves and she was nothing. She would be dragged before the council, declared a thief, and punished. Best case, they would take everything she owned. Worst case, they would execute her as an example. "Where is he?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrett's grin returned. "That's a good girl. He's at the beta's house. You'll come with us now." Elena glanced at the shelves, mentally cataloging what she would need. Needle and thread, clean cloth, something for the pain if the wound was bad enough. She reached for her satchel, but Garrett grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "No bag," he said. "You don't need to take anything. The beta has supplies. I need my tools. You need to do what you're told." He yanked her toward the door, and Elena stumbled, her weak legs barely holding her upright. The other 2 guards followed, one of them pulling the door shut behind them with enough force to rattle the frame. The rain soaked through her shawl immediately, cold water streaming down her face and neck. She tried to pull her arm free, but Garrett only tightened his grip, dragging her forward through the mud and darkness. The beta's house was a mile away, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that loomed over the village like a warning. Lights blazed in the windows, and as they approached, Elena could hear shouting from inside, male voices raised in anger. Garrett hauled her up the steps and through the front door without knocking, and the warmth of the interior hit her like a slap after the freezing rain outside. The beta, a massive wolf named Cornelius, stood in the center of the main room, his face twisted with fury. His son, a young man barely older than Elena, lay on a long wooden table, blood pooling beneath him. The wound in his side was deep, the edges ragged, and Elena could see immediately that it had nicked something vital. The boy was pale, his breathing shallow, his eyes glassy with shock. "Fix him," Cornelius barked, not looking at Elena. "Now." Elena moved forward on instinct, her mind shifting into the cold, focused state she adopted whenever she worked. She pressed her hands against the wound, feeling the slickness of blood, the heat of the boy's skin. He needs stitches, and he's losing too much blood. I need clean water, bandages, thread. Then get it, Cornelius roared. What are you waiting for? I don't know where. One of the guards shoved her toward a side room, and Elena stumbled through the doorway into what looked like a storage area. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with supplies, more than Elena had ever seen in one place. She grabbed what she needed, her hands shaking, and hurried back to the table. For the next 2 hours, she worked without stopping. She cleaned the wound, stitched the torn flesh, packed the injury with herbs to prevent infection. The boy screamed and thrashed, and it took 2 of the guards to hold him down while Elena worked. Cornelius paced the room like a caged animal, snarling orders and threats, his eyes burning with a fury that had nothing to do with concern for his son and everything to do with wounded pride. When Elena finally tied off the last stitch, her hands were covered in blood, her arms aching from the effort of holding the needle steady. The boy had passed out from the pain, his breathing more regular now, his color slightly better. Elena stepped back, swaying on her feet, and Cornelius turned to her with a look of such contempt that she flinched. If he dies, the beta said, his voice low and venomous, I will make sure you suffer for it. Do you understand? Elena nodded, too exhausted to speak. Get out. She did not need to be told twice. She turned and fled, stumbling back out into the rain, her legs barely holding her upright. The guards did not follow her. They had gotten what they wanted, and now she was nothing to them again. Disposable. Irrelevant. She walked back to her cabin in the dark, the rain washing the blood from her hands, her mind numb with exhaustion and fear. When she finally reached her door, she collapsed inside, too tired to even remove her soaked clothing. She lay on the cold floor, shivering, and stared at the ceiling. This was her life. This was all it would ever be. Servitude and fear, invisibility and pain, a slow, grinding existence that would end one day when her body finally gave out, and no one would care enough to bury her. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of something crying outside her door. She dragged herself upright, every muscle screaming in protest, and opened the door to find 3 small shapes huddled together on her doorstep. Wolf pups, no more than a few weeks old, their fur matted and wet, their eyes wide with terror. They whimpered when they saw her, pressing against each other as if they could disappear into the pile of their own bodies. Elena's breath caught. Wolf pups, this young, this vulnerable, should never be alone. They should be with their pack, protected, cared for. But these 3 were clearly abandoned, left to die in the cold and rain. She knelt slowly, extending her hand, and the smallest of the 3 crept forward, sniffing her fingers. Its nose was cold, its body trembling, and when Elena touched its head, it pressed into her palm with a desperation that broke something inside her. She could not leave them. She knew what it was to be abandoned, to be cast aside as if you were nothing. She gathered the pups into her arms, feeling their small bodies shivering against her chest, and carried them inside. She had no food for herself, but she would find something for them. She had no warmth, but she would share what little she had. They were helpless, and she was all they had. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Elena Hart felt something other than fear. She felt purpose. Over the next 3 days, Elena cared for the pups with a ferocity that surprised even her. She fed them warmed goat's milk begged from a farmer who owed her a favor, wrapped them in the few blankets she owned, kept them close to her body for warmth. They grew stronger under her care, their eyes brighter, their movements more confident. They followed her everywhere, tumbling over each other in their eagerness to stay close, and at night they slept in a pile at the foot of her bed, their soft breathing the only sound in the dark cabin. Elena did not know where they had come from. She did not know why they had been abandoned, but she could guess. Weak pups, runts, omegas like her, deemed unworthy of the resources it would take to raise them. In Silvercrest, strength was everything, and weakness was a sin. These pups had been cast out because they were not strong enough, not valuable enough, and Elena understood that in a way that made her chest ache. She kept them hidden. She did not tell anyone they were there. She knew that if the village found out, they would take the pups away. and whatever fate awaited them would not be kind. So she kept the door locked, kept the windows shuttered, and when she had to leave to gather herbs or tend to the rare villager who came seeking her help, she made sure the pups were quiet and safe. But secrets, in a kingdom of wolves, were never kept for long. On the fourth day, Elena returned from gathering firewood to find her door open. Her heart stopped. She dropped the wood and ran inside, her mind screaming with panic, and found the pups cowering in the corner, their eyes fixed on the figure standing in the center of her cabin. A guard, not one of the village enforcers, but a royal guard, his uniform marked with the silver crest of the Alpha King. He was tall and broad, his face hard, his eyes cold. He looked at Elena with the kind of detached assessment one might give a piece of furniture. "Elena Hart," he said, his voice flat. "You are summoned to the capital." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Why?" "The Alpha King has questions about 3 missing pups. You will answer them." She could not breathe, could not think. The royal guards had found the pups. Somehow they had tracked them here, to her cabin, and now she was being dragged before the king himself. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in Silvercrest, the one whose word was law and whose anger was death. "I found them abandoned," Elena said desperately. "I was only trying to help." "You will explain yourself to the king," the guard interrupted. "Come willingly, or I will drag you." Elena looked at the pups, their small bodies pressed against the wall, their eyes wide with fear. She looked at the guard, at the cold certainty in his expression. She had no choice. She had never had a choice. "Can I bring them?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Please, they're frightened." The guard's expression did not change. "They will be transported separately. You will come with me now." He grabbed her arm, his grip iron, and pulled her toward the door. Elena twisted, reaching for the pups, but the guard yanked her forward with enough force to make her cry out. The last thing she saw before she was dragged outside was the smallest pup, the one who had first trusted her, staring after her with eyes that seemed to understand betrayal. The journey to the capital took 2 days. Elena was thrown into a wagon with iron bars, locked inside like a criminal, and driven through the kingdom she had never seen. Silvercrest was beautiful in a way that hurt, all towering trees and silver rivers, ancient stone structures that gleamed in the sunlight. But Elena saw it through the bars of her cage, and all she could think was that this was the kingdom that had decided she was worthless, the kingdom that would now decide her fate. When they finally reached the capital, the city rose before her like something out of a nightmare. Massive walls of dark stone, towers that pierced the sky, gates guarded by wolves whose eyes glowed with barely contained power. The wagon was pulled through the streets, and people stopped to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. Elena kept her eyes down, her body curled in on itself, trying to make herself as small as possible. The palace was worse. It loomed over the city like a storm cloud, all black stone and sharp angles, windows like empty eyes. The wagon stopped in a courtyard, and the guard unlocked the cage, dragging Elena out and marching her through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. She passed wolves in fine clothing, servants who looked through her as if she did not exist, guards who watched her with expressions of cold calculation. Finally, she was shoved into a small room with stone walls and a single barred window. The guard locked the door behind her and left without a word. Elena stood in the center of the room, shaking, her mind racing. She did not know what was going to happen to her. She did not know if she would leave this place alive. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows through the window. Elena sat on the cold floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, and waited. She thought of the pups, wondered where they were, if they were safe. She thought of her cabin, her small life, everything she had tried so hard to hold together. And she thought of the Alpha King, the wolf who ruled this kingdom with absolute power, and wondered what kind of monster he must be to inspire so much fear. When the door finally opened, Elena looked up, expecting another guard. Instead, she saw him. The Alpha King stood in the doorway, and the air in the room seemed to shift. to thicken, as if the very walls were bowing to his presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, cold and piercing, and when they fixed on Elena, she felt as if every secret she had ever kept was laid bare. He stepped into the room, and the door closed behind him with a finality that made Elena's heart hammer in her chest. He did not speak. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Elena realized with a sinking certainty that whatever happened next would decide whether she lived or died. And in that moment, as the Alpha King's gaze burned into her, Elena Hart felt the pull of something she did not understand, something primal and terrifying and impossible to ignore. Her wolf, silent for so long, stirred inside her, reaching toward him with a desperation that made her gasp. No, it could not be. It was not possible. But the bond snapped into place anyway, undeniable and absolute, and Elena knew, with a certainty that shattered everything she thought she understood about the world, that the Alpha King was her mate. The silence stretched between them like a blade, sharp and dangerous. Elena could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but stare at the man who had just walked into her prison cell and shattered every truth she had ever known. The Alpha King, Alaric Draven, the most powerful wolf in Silvercrest, the ruler whose word could end lives with a whisper, whose presence commanded absolute obedience from every creature in his territory. And he was her mate. The bond thrummed between them, electric and undeniable, a connection that sang through her blood and made her wolf howl with recognition. But it was wrong. It had to be wrong. The Alpha King was mated. Everyone knew that. He had a Luna, a queen, a woman who ruled at his side and bore his children. The mate bond could not be broken, could not be false, could not exist between two wolves if one was already claimed. Unless everything Elena had been told was a lie. Alaric's eyes narrowed as he studied her, his expression carved from stone. He took a step closer, and Elena flinched, pressing herself against the wall despite the instinct screaming at her to move toward him, to close the distance, to touch him and confirm what her wolf was telling her. She fought the urge with everything she had, because touching the Alpha King without permission was death, and she had no desire to make her execution easier for him. "Your name," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel scraped across metal. It was not a question. It was a command. "Elena Hart," she whispered, her throat tight. "You found 3 pups outside your cabin 4 days ago. Yes? You took them in, hid them, cared for them without reporting their presence to the authorities." Elena's hands trembled. They were dying. They were alone and starving, and I could not leave them to die. "Those pups," Alaric said, his voice dropping to something darker, "are the children of the Alpha King. My children. And you stole them." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. "I did not steal them. I found them abandoned on my doorstep. They were soaked and freezing, and no one was looking for them. I only wanted to keep them safe." "Safe?" Alaric's lips twisted into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. "You, an Omega, with no rank, no pack, no resources, thought you could keep the royal heirs safe better than their own family?" "I did not know they were royal," Elena said desperately. "I did not know who they belonged to. They were just 3 helpless pups, and I could not turn them away." Alaric moved closer, and Elena felt the power radiating off him like heat from a flame. He was massive, towering over her, his presence filling the small room until there was no space left for anything else. He stopped just inches from her, so close she could feel his breath on her face. And when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My children ran to you. When the guards found them in your cabin, they did not come to me. They ran to you, a stranger, and cowered behind you as if you were their mother. Explain that." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "I do not know why. I only know that they were frightened, and I tried to comfort them. Children respond to kindness. Perhaps they simply recognized that I meant them no harm." "Kindness," Alaric repeated, as if the word tasted bitter. "You think my children do not know kindness?" You think they are so starved for affection that they would turn to a commoner, an omega, someone with no connection to them at all? I do not know what your children know, Elena said, her voice shaking. I only know what I saw. They were alone. They were suffering. And I did what anyone with a heart would do. For a long moment, Alaric said nothing. He simply stared at her, his eyes searching her face as if looking for something he could not name. Elena felt the bond pulling at her, insistent and impossible to ignore, and she knew he felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his wolf rose to the surface of his eyes, turning them molten gold. You are Omega, he said finally, his voice rough. You should not be able to feel what you are feeling right now. Elena's breath caught. He knew. He felt the bond, and he was acknowledging it. And that meant she was not insane, not imagining it. But it also meant she was in more danger than she had ever been, because if the Alpha King felt the mate bond with someone who was not his Luna, it would destroy everything. The kingdom, the alliances, the carefully constructed hierarchy that kept Silvercrest stable. I do not understand it either, Elena whispered. But I swear to you, I have done nothing wrong. I found your children, and I cared for them. That is all. Alaric's expression darkened. That is not all, and we both know it. You felt the bond the moment I walked into this room. You cannot hide it. I can see it in your eyes, smell it on your skin. You are my... He stopped, the word catching in his throat, and Elena saw something flicker across his face. Pain, confusion, fury. He turned away from her abruptly, his hands curling into fists, and for a moment she thought he might punch the wall. This is not possible, he said, his voice tight. I am mated. I have been mated for 10 years. The bond is sacred, unbreakable. It cannot exist with two wolves simultaneously. I know, Elena said, her voice barely audible. I do not understand it either, but I feel it, and I think you feel it too, and I do not know what that means. Alaric spun back to face her, and the fury in his eyes made her shrink against the wall. What it means is that you are either a liar or a witch. It means that you have done something, used some kind of dark magic or manipulation to make me feel this. And if that is true, I will have you executed before the sun sets. I am not a witch, Elena said, her voice rising in desperation. I am nothing. I am no one. I have no power, no magic, no ability to manipulate anyone. I am just an Omega who lives alone and heals the sick when they demand it. I did not ask for this. I did not want this. I do not even understand what this is. Alaric stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the conflict raging behind his eyes. He wanted to believe her. She could see it. But he also wanted to deny what he was feeling, to reject the bond that connected them, because accepting it would mean admitting that everything he thought he knew was wrong. The Luna, Elena said quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Your mate, the mother of those pups. Where was she when they were abandoned? Why were they alone in the forest, starving and terrified, if they have a mother who is supposed to care for them? The change in Alaric's expression was immediate and terrifying. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf surging to the surface. And for a moment, Elena thought he would shift right there in the small room and tear her apart. But he held himself in check, his body trembling with the effort of control. And when he spoke, his voice was barely human. You do not speak of the Luna. You do not question her. You do not have the right. I am not questioning her, Elena said quickly, trying to placate him. I am only trying to understand. If those pups are hers and she is their mother, then why were they abandoned? Why did they run to me instead of to her when they were found? Why do they not feel safe with their own family? Alaric's jaw worked, and Elena could see the war raging inside him. He wanted to defend his Luna, to shut down the questions, to silence Elena before she said something that could not be unsaid. But he could not, because he did not have the answers. And that, more than anything, seemed to shake him. You will remain here, he said finally, his voice cold and controlled. You will not leave this room. You will speak to no one. and you will pray that I find a reason not to have you executed for treason." He turned and strode toward the door, his movements sharp and angry. But before he could leave, Elena called out to him, her voice desperate. "The pups. Please. Are they safe? Are they being cared for?" Alaric stopped, his hand on the door, but he did not turn around. "They are with their mother where they belong." "But are they safe?" Elena pressed, her heart breaking at the thought of those small, frightened creatures being dragged back to a place where they were not wanted. "Please. I do not care what happens to me. I just need to know they are safe." For a long moment, Alaric said nothing. Then, without looking back, he said, "They are screaming. They have not stopped screaming since they were taken from you. My Luna cannot calm them. The healers cannot calm them. They cry for you, Elena Hart, and I do not know why." The door slammed shut behind him, and Elena was alone again, the weight of his words crushing her chest. The pups were suffering. They were crying for her, and she could not reach them, could not comfort them, could not do anything but sit in this cold stone room and wait for a king to decide whether she lived or died. She sank to the floor, her legs giving out beneath her, and pressed her face into her hands. This was a nightmare. This was impossible. She had done nothing wrong, and yet she was being punished for it, trapped in a palace that felt more like a tomb, bonded to a king who hated her for existing. And somewhere in this vast, cold place, 3 small pups were crying for her, and she could not reach them. Hours passed. The sun set, plunging the room into darkness, and still no one came. Elena sat against the wall, her body aching, her mind racing. She thought about the pups, about their small bodies pressed against hers, their trust in her despite having every reason to fear the world. She thought about Alaric, about the bond that tied them together, about the pain and confusion in his eyes when he felt it. She thought about the Luna, the queen who had abandoned her own children, and wondered what kind of woman could do such a thing. The door opened again, and Elena looked up, expecting Alaric. Instead, she saw a woman, tall and elegant, dressed in silver silk that shimmered in the torchlight. Her hair was pale blonde, her eyes ice blue, and her expression was one of cold disdain. She stepped into the room, and the guard behind her closed the door, leaving them alone. "So you are the Omega," the woman said, her voice smooth and mocking. "The little nobody who thinks she can steal my children." Elena's blood turned cold. This was the Luna, Queen Seraphina Vale, the woman who ruled Silvercrest at Alaric's side, the woman who was supposed to be his mate. She was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and deadly, and the look in her eyes promised pain. "I did not steal them," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I found them abandoned. I cared for them because no one else was." Seraphina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Abandoned? You think my children were abandoned? How quaint. Tell me, little Omega, do you know what happens to wolves who spread lies about the royal family? I am not spreading lies. I am telling the truth. The truth," Seraphina repeated, stepping closer. "The truth is that you are a thief and a liar. You took my children, hid them, and now you are trying to manipulate the king with some pathetic sob story. But I see through you. I know what you are. I am nothing," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I am just someone who tried to help." "You are a threat," Seraphina hissed, her eyes flashing with fury. "You are a threat to me, to my family, to everything I have built, and threats must be eliminated." She moved so quickly that Elena had no time to react. Seraphina's hand shot out, grabbing Elena by the throat and slamming her against the wall. Elena gasped, her hands clawing at Seraphina's wrist, but the Luna was strong, far stronger than Elena would ever be. She squeezed, cutting off Elena's air, and leaned in close, her breath hot against Elena's ear. "You will tell the king that you lied," Seraphina whispered, her voice venomous. "You will tell him that you stole the pups, that you used dark magic to make them trust you, and that you manipulated him into feeling whatever pathetic bond you think exists. You will confess to treason, and you will accept your execution without protest. Do you understand?" Elena could not speak, could not breathe. Black spots danced across her vision, and her lungs burned with the need for air. She tried to shake her head, tried to fight, but Serafina only squeezed harder. "If you do not," the Luna continued, her voice soft and deadly, "I will make sure those pups suffer. I will make sure they know pain like they have never known. And it will be your fault, because you were too stubborn to do as you were told." Serafina released her, and Elena collapsed to the floor, gasping and choking, her throat burning. The Luna stepped back, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened, and looked down at Elena with cold satisfaction. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," she said. "Choose wisely." She turned and left, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Elena lay on the floor, coughing, her body trembling with shock and fear. Serafina had threatened the pups. She had threatened to hurt them if Elena did not confess to crimes she had not committed. And Elena knew, with a sinking certainty, that the Luna was not bluffing. She curled into a ball, her arms wrapped around herself, and tried to think. She could not let the pups be hurt. She could not let them suffer because of her. But if she confessed, if she accepted execution, who would protect them? Who would make sure they were safe when their own mother wanted to use them as leverage? The bond pulsed inside her, a steady rhythm that connected her to Alaric even through the stone walls and distance. She could feel his presence, somewhere in the palace, could feel his confusion and anger and something else, something softer that he was trying to suppress. He felt the bond, too. He knew it was real. But would he believe her over his Luna? Would he risk everything to protect an Omega he had just met? Elena did not know, but she knew she could not give up. Not yet. Not while those pups were crying for her. Not while there was still a chance to save them. She had survived 23 years in a world that wanted her dead. She had endured abuse and starvation and loneliness, and she had kept going because she had no other choice. And she would keep going now, because 3 small lives depended on her, and she would not let them down. The night dragged on, cold and endless. Elena did not sleep. She sat against the wall, her mind racing, her body aching, and waited for morning. When the first light of dawn crept through the barred window, the door opened again, and 2 guards entered, their expressions blank. "The Alpha King has summoned you," one of them said. "You will come with us now." Elena stood on shaking legs and followed them out of the room. They led her through the palace, down corridors lined with portraits of past kings and queens, through halls where servants stopped to stare at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. She kept her eyes down, her hands clasped in front of her, and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. They brought her to a massive chamber, its walls lined with dark wood and silver banners. At the far end of the room, a throne sat on a raised platform, and in it sat Alaric, his expression carved from stone. To his right stood Serafina, her face a mask of cold beauty, and around the room stood members of the royal council, wolves of high rank and ancient bloodlines, all watching Elena with predatory interest. This was a tribunal. Elena realized it with a sinking feeling in her stomach. They were going to judge her, here and now, in front of the entire court. And whatever Serafina had planned, it was about to unfold. "Elena Hart," Alaric said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You stand accused of theft, manipulation, and treason against the crown. How do you answer these charges?" Elena's throat was dry, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked at Alaric, at the cold distance in his eyes, and wondered if the bond meant anything to him at all. She looked at Serafina, at the barely concealed triumph on the Luna's face, and knew that whatever she said, the queen had already decided her fate. But Elena had never been one to go quietly. "I found 3 pups abandoned in the forest," she said, her voice steady. "I cared for them because they were dying. I did not know they were royal. I did not steal them. I only tried to keep them safe. And yet they bonded to you?" Serafina said, her voice dripping with false concern. "They refused to come to me, their own mother. They screamed when taken from you. How do you explain that, if not through dark magic or manipulation?" "I cannot explain it," Elena said. "I can only tell you that I showed them kindness. and they responded to it. Perhaps they sensed that I meant them no harm. Or perhaps, Seraphina said, stepping forward, you used forbidden magic to bind them to you. Perhaps you sought to steal not just the pups, but the throne itself, by manipulating the king through false bonds and lies. Murmurs rippled through the council, and Elena felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She looked at Alaric, silently begging him to see the truth, to feel the bond that connected them and know that she was not lying. But his expression remained cold, unreadable, and Elena felt her hope crumbling. Do you deny, Alaric said, his voice hard, that you felt a connection to me when we met? A bond that should not exist? Elena's breath caught. He was asking her to deny the mate bond, to lie in front of the entire court. And if she did, she might survive. But if she told the truth, she would be condemned. She looked at him, at the storm in his eyes, and made her choice. I do not deny it, she said quietly. I felt the bond, and I know you felt it too. The chamber erupted in chaos. The council chamber descended into pandemonium. Voices rose in anger and disbelief, wolves shouting over one another, the sound echoing off the stone walls like thunder. Elena stood frozen in the center of the room, her confession hanging in the air like a death sentence. She had spoken the truth, and now she would pay for it with her life. Silence! Alaric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, sharp and commanding. The room fell quiet instantly, every wolf turning to face their king. He stood from his throne, his eyes blazing gold, his power radiating through the chamber with such intensity that several of the lower-ranked council members took an involuntary step back. I will have order in this court. Seraphina's face had gone pale, but her eyes glittered with something dark and triumphant. She turned to Alaric, her voice carefully controlled. You see, my king? She admits to using dark magic to create a false bond. She admits to attempting to manipulate you, to undermine our sacred union. This is treason of the highest order. That is not what I said, Elena protested, her voice rising. I did not create anything. I did not use magic. I simply told the truth about what I felt, what we both felt. Enough, Alaric said, his voice cold. He descended from the platform, moving toward Elena with slow, deliberate steps. The bond thrummed between them, stronger now that she had acknowledged it, and Elena could feel his wolf clawing at him, demanding that he protect her, claim her, defend her against the threats surrounding them. But his human side fought it, resisting the pull with everything he had. He stopped in front of her, so close she could see the war raging in his eyes. You claim to feel a mate bond with me. You claim that I feel it too. But I am already mated. The bond with my Luna has existed for 10 years. Explain to me how that is possible. Elena met his gaze, refusing to look away even though every instinct told her to submit, to lower her eyes, to show the deference an Omega owed to an Alpha King. I cannot explain it. I do not understand it. But I know what I feel, and I know it is real. The bond exists whether we want it to or not. Or, Seraphina interjected, moving to stand beside Alaric, she is lying, or she is delusional, or she has been manipulated by someone with more power than she possesses. My king, you cannot seriously be considering that this Omega, this nobody, could be your true mate when you are already bonded to me. Alaric's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he would agree with Seraphina, would dismiss her claim and order her execution. But then he turned to his Luna, and something in his expression made Seraphina's confident smile falter. When was the last time you saw our children? He asked, his voice quiet and dangerous. Seraphina blinked, clearly taken off guard by the question. I see them every day, of course. I am their mother. When was the last time you held them, fed them, comforted them when they cried? I have nurses for that, Seraphina said, her tone defensive. I am the queen. I have responsibilities that extend beyond. When was the last time? Alaric continued, his voice dropping to something lethal, that our children looked at you and did not flinch. The silence that followed was deafening. Seraphina's face flushed with anger, but she said nothing, and Elena could see the truth written in her eyes. The Luna did not care about her children. She had never cared about them. They were tools to her, nothing more, a means to secure her position and power. The pups were found abandoned in the forest, Alaric said, his eyes never leaving Serafina's face. They were starving, freezing, terrified. They were left to die, and the only reason they survived is because this Omega found them and cared for them. Explain to me, my Luna, how my children ended up alone in the forest when they should have been safe in the palace. I do not know, Serafina said, her voice tight. Perhaps they wandered off. Perhaps the nurses were negligent. It was not my fault. Not your fault, Alaric repeated, his voice thick with barely controlled fury. You are their mother. Everything that happens to them is your responsibility. And yet you stand here, more concerned with accusing Elena of treason than with explaining why your children were left to die. They were not left to die, Serafina snapped, her composure cracking. They were fine. They are fine. And this Omega has twisted you, made you doubt me, made you question our bond? Our bond, Alaric said, and his voice was suddenly cold, empty. Tell me, Serafina, do you feel it right now? The mate bond? The connection that should tie us together? Serafina's eyes widened, and Elena saw panic flicker across her face. Of course I feel it. It has always been there. Describe it to me. I do not need to describe it. You know what it feels like. It is sacred, unbreakable. Describe it, Alaric commanded, his voice sharp. Tell me what you feel right now, in this moment, when we are standing together. Tell me what the bond feels like. Serafina's mouth opened and closed, her face pale, and Elena realized with a shock that the Luna could not answer. She did not know what the mate bond felt like because she had never felt it. Whatever connection she claimed to have with Alaric, it was not real. You cannot, can you? Alaric said, his voice soft and deadly. You cannot describe it because you do not feel it. You never have. That is absurd, Serafina said, but her voice was shaking. We have been mated for 10 years. We have 3 children together. How can you stand there and accuse me of lying about something so fundamental? Because I have felt a real mate bond, Alaric said, and his eyes shifted to Elena. I felt it the moment I walked into that cell and saw her. I felt it pull at me, demand that I protect her, claim her, and I have been fighting it ever since because I thought it was impossible. Because I thought I was already mated to you. The chamber erupted again, voices rising in shock and anger. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, her mind reeling. Alaric was acknowledging the bond. He was admitting it in front of the entire court, and that meant everything was about to change. This is ridiculous, Serafina said, her voice rising to be heard over the chaos. You are being manipulated, my king. This Omega has done something to you, clouded your judgment. Enough, Alaric said, his voice cutting through the noise. I want answers. I want to know how a mate bond that should be sacred and unbreakable can exist with someone other than my supposed Luna. And I want to know why my children were abandoned in the forest when they should have been safe in their mother's care. He turned to the council, his expression hard. Summon the royal healer. Summon the high priestess. I want every expert on mate bonds brought before me. And I want the truth, no matter what it costs. The council members scattered, some rushing from the room to carry out his orders, others whispering urgently among themselves. Serafina stood frozen, her face a mask of barely controlled fury, and Elena could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. The Luna was calculating, planning, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But there was something else in Serafina's expression, something that made Elena's blood run cold. It was not panic or fear. It was rage, pure and venomous, and it was directed entirely at Elena. You will regret this, Serafina said quietly, her voice too soft for anyone but Elena to hear. You will regret ever crossing me. Before Elena could respond, Serafina turned and swept from the room, her silver dress trailing behind her like a storm cloud. The guards moved to stop her, but Alaric held up a hand, letting her go. Elena watched her leave, her stomach twisting with dread. Serafina was not defeated. She was planning something, and whatever it was, it would be terrible. Alaric turned back to Elena, his expression unreadable. You will be moved to a guarded chamber. You will not be harmed, but you will not be free to leave. Do you understand? Elena nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She had expected execution, had prepared herself for death, and instead she was being given a reprieve. But she did not know if it was mercy or simply a delay, a chance for Alaric to decide her fate without the pressure of the court watching. 2 guards stepped forward, and Elena followed them from the chamber, her legs shaking beneath her. She could feel the eyes of the council on her back, could hear the whispers starting already. The Omega who claimed to be the Alpha King's mate, the nobody who had dared to challenge the Queen. She was going to be the subject of gossip and speculation, and she knew that many of those whispers would be cruel. The chamber they brought her to was larger than the cell she had been kept in, with a proper bed and a window that overlooked the palace gardens. It was still a prison, but it was a gilded one, and Elena sank onto the bed with a shuddering breath. Her throat still ached from where Serafina had choked her, and her body felt like it had been beaten, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and fear. She thought about the pups, wondered where they were, if they were still crying. She thought about Alaric, about the conflict in his eyes when he admitted to feeling the bond. She thought about Serafina, about the fury and hatred in the Luna's face, and knew that the Queen would not let this go. Serafina had too much to lose, and she would do whatever it took to protect her position. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows through the window. Servants came and went, bringing food and water, but they did not speak to her, did not meet her eyes. Elena tried to eat, but her stomach was too tight with anxiety, and she could only manage a few bites before pushing the plate away. As night fell, the door opened, and Elena looked up, expecting another servant. Instead, she saw a woman in flowing white robes, her hair silver gray, her eyes kind but sharp. She carried a staff carved with intricate runes, and power radiated from her like heat. I am Evelina, the woman said, her voice gentle. High Priestess of the Moon Temple. The Alpha King has asked me to speak with you. Elena stood quickly, her heart racing. About the bond? Among other things. Evelina moved into the room, closing the door behind her, and gestured for Elena to sit. I have been studying mate bonds for over 50 years, child. I have seen true bonds and false ones, bonds forged by the moon goddess herself, and bonds created through deception. Tell me what you feel when you are near the Alpha King. Elena hesitated, then described it as best she could. The pull, the recognition, the way her wolf surged toward him as if he were the other half of her soul, the way it felt like coming home and being torn apart all at once, a connection so deep it was almost painful. Evelina listened in silence, her expression thoughtful. When Elena finished, the priestess nodded slowly. What you describe is a true mate bond. There is no mistaking it. But that raises a troubling question. If you are bonded to the Alpha King, then what is the nature of his connection to the Luna? She said they have been mated for 10 years, Elena said. They have children together. How can that be if the bond is not real? There are ways, Evelina said slowly, to create the appearance of a mate bond. Dark magic, blood rituals, binding spells. They are forbidden, of course, punishable by death. But they exist, and they can be powerful enough to fool even the most experienced wolves. Elena's breath caught. You think Serafina used magic to fake the bond? I think, Evelina said carefully, that it is a possibility worth investigating. But you must understand, child, that accusing the Luna of such a crime is incredibly dangerous. If we are wrong, if the bond is genuine and you are somehow mistaken, then you will be executed for treason. And even if we are right, proving it will not be easy. Serafina is powerful, well-connected, and ruthless. She will not go down without a fight. I do not care about the danger, Elena said, her voice firm. I care about those pups. I care about making sure they are safe. If Serafina is willing to abandon them, to use them as pawns, then they need to be protected from her. Evelina studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a small, sad expression. You have a good heart, Elena Hart. It is rare. in this world of power and politics, to find someone who cares more about others than about themselves. But you must be careful. Serafina will see you as a threat, and she will do everything in her power to destroy you. She already tried, Elena said quietly, touching her bruised throat. She came to my cell and threatened to hurt the pups if I did not confess to crimes I did not commit. Evelina's expression darkened. Did anyone witness this? No, it was just the two of us. Then it is your word against hers, and in the eyes of the court, her word will always carry more weight. Evelina sighed, leaning on her staff. But I will do what I can to uncover the truth. I will examine the Luna, test her bond with the king, and if there is deception at work, I will find it. Thank you, Elena whispered. Evelina reached out and placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. You are stronger than you know, child. Do not let them break you. She left, and Elena was alone again, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to quiet the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She had survived this long. She would survive this too. She had to, for the sake of those 3 small pups who depended on her. She must have fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, she was being jolted awake by the sound of screaming. High-pitched, terrified, the cries of children in distress. Elena bolted upright, her heart pounding, and ran to the door. It was locked, but she pounded on it anyway, shouting for the guards. Let me out! The pups are in danger! No one came. The screaming continued, echoing through the halls, and Elena felt the bond with the pups pulling at her, a connection she had not realized existed until this moment. They were calling for her, crying for her, and she could not reach them. She slammed her shoulder against the door again and again, desperation giving her strength. The wood cracked, but it held. She could hear footsteps now, voices raised in alarm, and the screaming grew louder, more frantic. Finally, the door opened, and a guard stood there, his face pale. You need to come with me, now. Elena did not ask questions. She ran, following the guard through the winding corridors, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone. They reached a set of doors that had been thrown open, and inside, Elena could see chaos. Nurses and healers crowded around a large bed where the 3 pups huddled together, their small bodies trembling, their eyes wild with fear. And standing over them, her face twisted with fury, was Serafina. They will learn to obey me, the Luna was saying, her voice sharp. They will learn that I am their mother and they will respect me. One of the nurses, a young woman with tear-streaked cheeks, tried to approach the pups, but they snapped at her, their tiny teeth bared. My queen, they are terrified. Perhaps if we give them time, they have had time. Serafina snapped. They have had too much time with that Omega, and now they think they can reject me. I will not tolerate this. She reached for the smallest pup, the one who had first trusted Elena, and the pup let out a scream that made Elena's blood run cold. Without thinking, Elena pushed past the guard and ran into the room. Stop! She shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. You are hurting them! Every head turned toward her. Serafina's face went white with rage. But before she could speak, the 3 pups saw Elena and cried out in unison. They scrambled off the bed, tumbling over each other in their haste, and ran straight to her. Elena dropped to her knees and gathered them into her arms, feeling their small bodies press against her, their hearts racing. Shh, she whispered, stroking their fur, her own eyes burning with tears. I am here. I have you. You are safe. The pups quieted immediately, their trembling easing, and they burrowed into her embrace as if they could disappear into her. Elena held them tightly, her heart breaking at the relief she felt in their small bodies. They had been so frightened, so desperate, and no one had been able to comfort them except her. How dare you? Serafina hissed, advancing on Elena with murder in her eyes. How dare you come in here and undermine me in front of my staff? Those are my children, and you have no right. They are children, Elena said, her voice shaking with anger. They are not tools for you to control. They are not weapons for you to use. They are living beings who deserve to be loved and cared for. And you have done neither. You know nothing about what I have done, Serafina snarled. You are a nobody, an omega, a worthless piece of… Enough. The word cut through the room like a blade, and everyone turned to see Alaric standing in the doorway. His expression was cold, his eyes blazing gold, and the power radiating from him made the air itself seem to tremble. He looked at Serafina, at Elena kneeling on the floor with the pups in her arms, and his jaw tightened. Serafina, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Step away from them. They are my children, Serafina said, but her voice had lost its certainty. I have every right? Step away from them, Alaric repeated, and this time it was a command, backed by the full force of his alpha authority. Serafina's wolf whimpered, instinctively obeying, and she took a step back, her face flushed with humiliation. Alaric moved into the room, his eyes fixed on Elena and the pups. He knelt beside them, and Elena felt the bond flare between them, so strong it made her gasp. The pups looked up at him, their small eyes wary, and for a moment Elena thought they would cower. But then the smallest one, the bravest, crept forward and sniffed Alaric's hand. The Alpha King went very still. He extended his hand slowly, carefully, and the pup pressed its nose against his palm. And then, to Elena's shock, it climbed into his lap, curling up against his chest. The other two followed, hesitant but trusting, and within moments all three pups were nestled against their father, their small bodies finally at ease. Alaric looked down at them, and Elena saw something break in his expression. Pain, regret, a sorrow so deep it seemed to come from his very soul. He touched their heads gently, his large hands trembling, and when he looked up at Elena, his eyes were filled with a torment she could barely comprehend. They feel safe with you, he said, his voice rough. They trust you. Why? Because I showed them kindness, Elena said softly. Because I cared for them when no one else would. That is all. Alaric's eyes shifted to Serafina, and the Luna flinched under the weight of his gaze. Leave, he said quietly. Now. Alaric, I said leave. Serafina's face twisted with fury, but she turned and swept from the room, her staff scattering before her. The door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Alaric looked back down at the pups, at the way they had curled against him, and Elena saw the truth dawning in his eyes. His children had never felt safe with Serafina. They had never known her love, her care, her protection. They had been raised by nurses and servants, kept at arm's length by a mother who saw them as nothing more than a means to an end. And now, when they finally had a choice, they chose Elena, a stranger, because she was the only one who had ever shown them genuine compassion. I need to know the truth, Alaric said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to know if the bond with Serafina is real, or if I have been living a lie for 10 years. Evelina is investigating, Elena said. She will find the truth. And if the bond is false? Alaric looked at her, his eyes searching hers. If Serafina deceived me, deceived the entire kingdom, what then? Then you make it right, Elena said. You protect your children. You protect the kingdom, and you do not let her hurt anyone else. Alaric held her gaze for a long moment, and Elena felt the bond between them thrumming with a certainty that left no room for doubt. He felt it. He knew it was real. And no matter what happened, no matter what the cost, they would face it together. But as the pups slept peacefully against their father's chest, and Elena sat beside them on the cold floor, she could not shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Elena remained in the palace, no longer a prisoner but not quite free either. She was given a chamber near the royal nursery, a room that was comfortable but clearly guarded, and she was allowed to see the pups whenever they cried for her, which was often. They had bonded to her in a way that seemed to transcend reason, and no amount of coaxing from nurses or healers could convince them to accept comfort from anyone else when she was not there. Except, slowly, they were beginning to accept their father. Alaric spent hours with the pups, sitting on the floor of the nursery while they played around him, their small bodies gradually growing bolder. At first, they had been wary, approaching him only when Elena was present, as if her presence gave them permission to trust him. But over time, they began to seek him out on their own, climbing into his lap, tugging at his clothes with their tiny teeth, wrestling with each other while he watched with an expression that was equal parts wonder and heartbreak. Elena watched these moments from the doorway, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. She saw the way Alaric looked at his children, the way his hands trembled when he touched them, as if he feared they might shatter. She saw the guilt written in every line of his face, the knowledge that he had failed them, that he had been so consumed with ruling and maintaining appearances that he had not noticed his own children were suffering. And she saw the way he looked at her, when he thought she was not paying attention. His eyes would find her across the room, and the bond would flare between them, hot and insistent, a connection that grew stronger with every passing day. He had stopped trying to deny it. He could not when it pulled at him so constantly, not when his wolf howled for her every time she was near. But he had not acted on it. He had not claimed her, had not spoken of the bond beyond that single acknowledgement in the tribunal chamber, because he was still mated to Serafina, at least in the eyes of the law, and until that was resolved, he could not move forward. Evelina worked tirelessly, spending long hours in the temple, consulting ancient texts and performing rituals meant to reveal the truth about mate bonds. She examined Serafina multiple times, much to the Luna's fury, and each examination only deepened the priestess's suspicions. There was something wrong with the bond between Alaric and Serafina, something twisted and unnatural, but Evelina could not yet prove what it was. Meanwhile, Serafina grew more dangerous by the day. The Luna moved through the palace like a storm, her fury barely contained beneath a veneer of cold composure. She avoided the nursery, avoided her children entirely, as if their rejection of her was a wound too deep to acknowledge. But she did not avoid Elena. She found ways to cross paths with her, to deliver cutting remarks disguised as polite conversation, to remind Elena at every turn that she was nothing, that she did not belong here, that her presence was a disruption to the natural order. And then there were the whispers. The palace staff gossiped endlessly, their voices carrying through the corridors when they thought no one was listening. They spoke of the Omega who had bewitched the king, of the Luna who was losing her grip on power, of the 3 pups who refused their mother's touch. The rumors grew wilder with each retelling, and Elena could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her from every direction. Some of the wolves looked at her with pity, others with contempt. A few, the ones who had always resented Serafina's cold rule, looked at her with something like hope. But none of them spoke to her directly. She was caught in a liminal space, neither servant nor queen, neither prisoner nor guest, and the isolation was suffocating. The only person who treated her like a person was Alaric. He came to her chamber one evening, after the pups had been put to bed, and knocked softly on the door. Elena opened it to find him standing in the hallway, his expression tired, his shoulders heavy with the weight of everything he carried. He looked at her for a long moment, and then, without a word, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice rough. Elena nodded, gesturing for him to sit, but he remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked like a man at war with himself, torn between duty and desire, between what he had been told was true and what he knew in his bones to be real. "Evelina believes the bond with Serafina is false," he said finally. "She has found traces of dark magic in the Luna's blood, remnants of a ritual that should not exist. But she needs more time to prove it, to trace the magic back to its source and confirm her suspicions." Elena's breath caught. "So it is true. Serafina lied. She used magic to make you think you were mated to her. It appears that way." Alaric's jaw tightened. "But I need to understand why. Why would she do this? What did she have to gain?" "Power," Elena said quietly. "She wanted to be queen. She wanted the throne, the title, the authority. And the only way to guarantee that was to bind herself to you in a way that could not be broken." "But the children," Alaric said, his voice cracking. "We have 3 children together. How is that possible if the bond is not real?" Elena hesitated, then spoke carefully. A mate bond is not required to conceive children. It simply makes the connection stronger, the desire more intense. If Serafina used magic to make you believe you were bonded, then your body would have responded as if the bond were real. You would have desired her, felt connected to her, even if the foundation was a lie. Alaric closed his eyes, his face twisting with anguish. I have been living a lie for 10 years. I have given her everything, trusted her with the kingdom, with our children, and all of it was built on deception. You did not know, Elena said gently. She deceived you. That is not your fault. But the children suffered because of it. Alaric's eyes snapped open, blazing with fury and self-loathing. They were neglected, abandoned, left to fend for themselves because I was too blind to see that their mother did not care about them. I should have known. I should have seen it. You see it now, Elena said, and you are trying to make it right. That is what matters. Alaric looked at her, and the bond thrummed between them, so strong it made her knees weak. He took a step toward her, then another, until they were standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hand came up, hesitating, and then he touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that made her breath catch. I feel you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every moment of every day I feel you pulling at me. My wolf recognizes you as mine, and it is taking everything I have not to claim you right here, right now. But I cannot. Not while Serafina still holds the title of Luna. Not while the kingdom still sees her as my mate. If I claim you before her deception is proven, it will destroy everything. I know, Elena whispered. I understand. Do you? Alaric's thumb brushed across her cheek, and Elena leaned into the touch despite herself. Do you understand what it costs me to stand here and not touch you the way I want to? To not mark you, claim you, make you mine in every way that matters? Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I feel it too. The bond, the pull. It is agony to be this close and not be able to cross the distance between us. Alaric's forehead came to rest against hers, and they stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, the bond singing between them. It was not enough. It would never be enough, but it was all they could have, at least for now. When this is over, Alaric said, his voice rough with emotion, when Serafina's lies are exposed and the false bond is broken, I will claim you before the entire kingdom. I will make you my Luna, my queen, and I will spend the rest of my life making up for the fact that I did not find you sooner. I will be here, Elena promised. No matter what happens, I will be here. Alaric pulled back, his hand lingering on her face for one more moment before he stepped away. Sleep well, Elena. Tomorrow, Evelina will present her findings to the council, and then we will know the truth. He left, and Elena sank onto the bed, her entire body trembling. The bond ached inside her, demanding completion, demanding that she go after him, that she claim what was hers. But she forced herself to stay put, to breathe through the need, to trust that Alaric knew what he was doing. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Elena was summoned to the council chamber once again. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple gown that one of the servants had provided, and tried to calm the storm of nerves raging inside her. She knew that Serafina would not go down without a fight, that the Luna would do whatever it took to protect her position and power, and Elena was terrified of what that might mean. The chamber was packed when she arrived, every member of the royal council present, along with what seemed like half the palace staff. Word had spread that something significant was about to be revealed, and everyone wanted to witness it. Elena took her place near the front, flanked by guards who were there as much to protect her as to keep her from fleeing. Alaric sat on his throne, his expression carved from stone, and beside him stood Serafina, her face a mask of cold fury. The Luna's eyes found Elena across the room, and the hatred in them was so intense it felt like a physical blow. Elena forced herself to hold that gaze, to not look away, to show that she was not afraid, even though she was terrified. Evelina entered the chamber, her white robes flowing behind her, and the room fell silent. The high priestess moved to stand before the throne, her staff planted firmly on the stone floor, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the chamber with undeniable authority. "I have completed my investigation into the mate bond between Alpha King Alaric Draven and Luna Seraphina Vale," she said, "and I have found irrefutable evidence that the bond is false, created through dark magic and blood ritual." The chamber erupted in chaos. Wolves shouted in disbelief and anger, council members demanded proof, and Seraphina's face went white with fury. Alaric held up a hand for silence, his expression unreadable, and the room slowly quieted. "Explain," he said, his voice cold. Evelina turned to face the council, her eyes hard. 10 years ago, shortly before the Alpha King announced his mating to Seraphina Vale, a series of powerful rituals were performed in secret. These rituals required the blood of both parties, along with specific herbs and incantations designed to mimic the sensation of a true mate bond. The magic does not create a real connection, but it creates the illusion of one, making both parties believe they are bonded. "That is absurd," Seraphina said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I have been mated to the king for 10 years. We have 3 children. How can you stand there and accuse me of using dark magic?" "Because I found the evidence," Evelina said calmly. She reached into her robes and pulled out a small vial, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is a sample of your blood, taken during my examination. It contains traces of belladonna, moonflower, and nightshade, all of which are used in bonding rituals. It also contains traces of the king's blood, which should not be present unless a ritual was performed." "That proves nothing," Seraphina snapped. "Those herbs could have entered my system in any number of ways." "Not in these concentrations," Evelina said, "and not combined with the specific pattern of scarring I found on your left wrist, hidden beneath glamour magic. A scar that matches the ritual cutting required for a false bonding ceremony." Seraphina's hand flew to her wrist, covering it instinctively, and Elena saw panic flicker across her face. The Luna realized too late that the gesture had given her away, and she quickly composed herself, her expression hardening. "This is a conspiracy," Seraphina said, her voice rising. "You are all working together to undermine me, to remove me from power so that this Omega can take my place. I will not stand for it." "You will stand for whatever the council decides," Alaric said, his voice like ice. He rose from his throne, his eyes blazing gold, and the power that radiated from him made the air itself tremble. "If what Evelina says is true, if you use dark magic to deceive me, to deceive the entire kingdom, then you have committed treason of the highest order, and the penalty for that is death." Seraphina's composure finally cracked. Her face twisted with fury and desperation, and she turned to the council, her voice pleading. "You cannot believe this. I am your Luna. I have served this kingdom faithfully for 10 years. I have given the king heirs. I have done everything expected of me. Except love your children," Elena said, her voice cutting through the chamber. Every head turned toward her, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure, but she did not back down. "You abandoned them. You left them to die in the forest because they were not useful to you. And when they survived, when they found someone who actually cared for them, you tried to force them to accept you through fear and violence. You have no right to speak," Seraphina hissed, advancing on Elena with murder in her eyes. "You are nothing. You are nobody. And when this is over, I will make sure you are destroyed." "That is enough," Alaric said, his voice sharp. He descended from the platform, moving to stand between Elena and Seraphina, his body a physical barrier. "You will not threaten her. You will not touch her, and you will answer for your crimes." Seraphina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My crimes? What about hers? She stole my children. She bewitched you. She has turned the entire palace against me." "She saved our children," Alaric corrected, his voice deadly. "She gave them the love and care that you never did. And as for bewitching me, the only one who used magic to manipulate a bond was you." "Prove it," Seraphina spat. "If you are so certain I used dark magic, then prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I will not go down without a fight." "Very well," Evelina said. She stepped forward, her staff glowing with soft white light. There is one way to prove the bond is false, a ritual of revelation performed by the High Priestess that will expose any magical deception, but it requires the consent of both parties. Alpha King, do you consent to this ritual? I do, Alaric said without hesitation. Evelina turned to Serafina. And you, Luna Serafina Vale, do you consent to this ritual? Serafina's face had gone pale, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. Elena could see the calculation in her expression, the wheels turning as she tried to figure out a way out of this. But there was no escape. If she refused the ritual, she would look guilty. If she agreed, her deception would be exposed. I consent, Serafina said finally, her voice tight. But when this ritual proves that I am innocent, I will demand the execution of everyone who participated in this conspiracy. So be it, Evelina said. She moved to the center of the chamber, and Alaric and Serafina followed. The priestess began to chant in a language Elena did not recognize, ancient words that seemed to make the very air vibrate with power. She drew symbols on the stone floor with her staff, intricate patterns that glowed with moonlight, and then she gestured for Alaric and Serafina to stand within the circle. The moment they stepped into the circle, the magic activated. Light flared, bright and blinding, and Elena shielded her eyes. When she looked again, she saw something that made her breath catch. Around Alaric and Serafina, threads of light had appeared, visible manifestations of the bond between them. But the threads were wrong. They were thin and frayed, shot through with dark veins that pulsed like poison. And as Elena watched, the threads began to unravel, disintegrating under the weight of the revelation magic. The bond was false, and now everyone could see it. Serafina staggered, her face contorting with pain as the magic she had used for 10 years was stripped away. She clutched at her chest, gasping, and when she looked up at Alaric, her eyes were filled with fury and desperation. You cannot do this, she said, her voice breaking. I am your Luna. I am the mother of your children. You cannot cast me aside. You were never my Luna, Alaric said, his voice cold and final. You were a liar and a deceiver, and you used dark magic to trap me in a false bond. The real crime is not that I am casting you aside. It is that I ever trusted you in the first place. He turned to the council, his expression hard. Serafina Vale is stripped of her title as Luna. She will be held in the palace prison while we determine the full extent of her crimes, and the council will convene to decide her punishment. No, Serafina said, her voice rising to a scream. No, you cannot do this to me. I will not let you. She lunged at Alaric, her hands shifting into claws, her wolf surging to the surface. But before she could reach him, guards seized her, dragging her back. She fought them, screaming and thrashing, her composure completely shattered. It took 4 wolves to restrain her, and even then she continued to struggle, her eyes wild with madness. You will regret this, she shrieked, her gaze fixed on Elena. All of you will regret this. I will make you suffer. I will make you pay. The guards dragged her from the chamber, her screams echoing through the halls. And then, finally, there was silence. Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding, unable to fully process what had just happened. The false bond had been exposed. Serafina had been stripped of her title, and Alaric was free. He turned to her, crossing the room in 3 long strides, and before Elena could react, he pulled her into his arms. The bond flared between them, hot and undeniable, and Elena felt her wolf surge forward, howling with joy at finally being allowed to acknowledge what had always been true. It is over, Alaric said, his voice rough with emotion. The lie is exposed, and now, finally, I can claim what is mine. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes burning with intensity. Elena Hart, you are my mate, my true mate, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worthy of every good thing this world has to offer. Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Alaric smiled, a real smile, the first she had ever seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Then let us begin," he said, and he kissed her, right there in front of the entire council, claiming her as his in the most public way possible. The chamber erupted in applause and cheers, but Elena heard none of it. All she could feel was the bond, finally complete, finally whole, connecting her to the man she was meant to be with. And for the first time in her entire life, Elena Hart felt like she belonged. The days following the revelation were a whirlwind of change and chaos. The palace buzzed with activity as the council worked to untangle the web of lies Serafina had woven over the past decade. Every alliance she had forged, every decision she had influenced, every piece of legislation she had pushed through was now being examined and questioned. The kingdom of Silvercrest was in upheaval, and at the center of it all stood Elena, no longer an invisible Omega, but the acknowledged mate of the Alpha King. It was overwhelming in ways she had never anticipated. Servants who had once looked through her now bowed when she passed. Council members who had dismissed her as nothing now sought her opinion on matters of state. The palace that had felt like a prison now felt like a labyrinth of expectations and responsibilities, and Elena found herself struggling to navigate it all. But she was not alone. Alaric was with her every step of the way, teaching her, guiding her, supporting her. And the pups, who had once been her only source of comfort, now followed her everywhere, their small bodies a constant reminder of why she had endured everything she had been through. The 3 pups had grown stronger under her care, their fear slowly giving way to curiosity and playfulness. They had names now, given to them by Alaric in a ceremony that had brought tears to Elena's eyes. Lyra, the smallest and bravest, with her silver-gray fur and bright amber eyes. Cassian, the middle child, bold and protective of his siblings. And Rowan, the largest, gentle and thoughtful, who watched everything with quiet intelligence. They were Alaric's children, but they had become hers too, in every way that mattered. And as she spent her days with them, teaching them and playing with them and simply being present, Elena began to understand what it meant to be a mother, not through blood or obligation, but through love and choice. Serafina remained locked in the palace prison, awaiting the council's decision on her punishment. The investigation into her crimes had revealed far more than anyone had anticipated. She had not worked alone. There was a network of conspirators, wolves who had helped her perform the bonding ritual, who had kept her secrets, who had benefited from her rise to power. Some had acted out of loyalty, others out of greed, but all of them were now facing justice. The most damning discovery was the evidence of Serafina's affair. For years, she had been meeting in secret with a rival alpha from a neighboring territory, a wolf named Darius Blackthorn, who ruled the Shadow Ridge Pack with an iron fist. The affair had not been merely romantic, it had been political. Serafina had been feeding Darius information about Silvercrest's defenses, its alliances, its weaknesses. She had been planning to betray Alaric, to help Darius overthrow him and claim the throne for themselves. The revelation sent shockwaves through the kingdom. It was not just that Serafina had faked the mate bond. It was that she had been actively working to destroy Silvercrest from within, using her position as Luna to undermine everything the kingdom stood for. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that many of the wolves who had once supported her now called for her execution. But Alaric was hesitant, not because he felt any sympathy for Serafina, but because he knew that executing her would create a martyr. There were still those who believed she had been wronged, who saw Elena as an interloper and Serafina as the rightful Luna. If Serafina died, those wolves would use her death as a rallying cry, and the kingdom would be plunged into civil war. So Alaric waited. He consulted with the council, with Evelina, with Elena, trying to find a solution that would bring justice without tearing the kingdom apart. And while he deliberated, Serafina sat in her cell, plotting. Elena did not know about the plot until it was almost too late. It happened on the night of the full moon, a night when the entire kingdom gathered to honor the moon goddess and celebrate the bonds that tied the packs together. It was to be Elena's first official appearance as the Alpha King's mate, the night when Alaric would present her to the kingdom and claim her as his Luna before the goddess herself. Elena was nervous in a way she had never been before. She had faced death and violence and cruelty, but none of it compared to the terror of standing before thousands of wolves and accepting a role she still did not fully understand. She stood in her chamber, dressed in a gown of midnight blue that shimmered like starlight, and tried to calm the storm of anxiety raging inside her. Alaric found her there, pacing the floor, her hands trembling. He closed the door behind him and crossed the room, pulling her into his arms without a word. Elena pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, letting the bond between them soothe her frayed nerves. "I am terrified," she admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I know," Alaric said, his hand stroking her hair. "But you do not have to be. You are stronger than you realize, Elena. You have survived things that would have broken most wolves. You saved my children when I failed them. You exposed a traitor and prevented a war. You are more than worthy of this. But what if they do not accept me?" Elena pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What if they see me as an Omega who does not belong, who has no right to stand beside you? Then they will be wrong," Alaric said firmly. "And I will spend every day proving to them that you are exactly where you are meant to be. You are my mate, Elena, my true mate, and nothing will change that." He kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring every ounce of his certainty and love into the connection between them. Elena melted into him, letting the bond wrap around her like a shield, and when they finally pulled apart, she felt steadier, more grounded. "Come," Alaric said, taking her hand. "It is time." They walked through the palace together, hand in hand, and Elena felt the weight of every eye upon them. The corridors were lined with wolves, all dressed in their finest, all watching as their king escorted his mate to the ceremony. Some looked at her with warmth and acceptance, others with skepticism or outright hostility. But Elena kept her head high, her hand firm in Alaric's, and walked forward with as much grace as she could muster. The ceremony was to be held in the palace courtyard, beneath the light of the full moon. A massive crowd had gathered, thousands of wolves from every corner of Silvercrest, all waiting to witness the moment when their new Luna was officially recognized. Elena's heart pounded as they stepped out into the open, the moonlight washing over them like a blessing. Evelina stood at the center of the courtyard, her white robes glowing in the silvery light, her staff raised high. She smiled when she saw Elena, a warm and genuine expression that helped ease some of the tension coiling in Elena's chest. "People of Silvercrest," Evelina called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "We gather tonight to honor the moon goddess and to witness the claiming of a new Luna. Alpha King Alaric Draven has found his true mate, the one chosen for him by the goddess herself. Tonight, we recognize that bond and welcome Elena Hart into our pack as our Luna and Queen." The crowd murmured, some in approval, others in doubt. Elena could feel their skepticism, their uncertainty, but she forced herself to stand tall, to meet their gazes without flinching. Alaric squeezed her hand, a silent reminder that he was with her, and together they stepped forward to stand before Evelina. The high priestess began the ritual, speaking words in the ancient tongue that resonated with power. She called upon the moon goddess to bless the bond, to recognize the connection between Alaric and Elena, to grant them strength and unity. As she spoke, the moonlight seemed to intensify, bathing them in a glow that was almost otherworldly. Elena felt the bond surge within her, stronger than ever, a connection that reached beyond the physical and touched something deep and primal. Her wolf rose to the surface, howling with joy, and she felt Alaric's wolf answer, their spirits intertwining in a way that transcended words. Evelina smiled and raised her staff. "By the power of the moon goddess, I recognize this bond as true and sacred. Elena Hart, you are now Luna of Silvercrest, mate to the Alpha King, protector of the pack. Do you accept this responsibility?" "I do," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "And do you, Alpha King Alaric Draven, claim this woman as your mate and Luna before the goddess and your people?" "I do," Alaric said, his voice resonating with absolute certainty. "Then let the bond be sealed." Alaric turned to Elena, his eyes glowing gold in the moonlight, and cupped her face in his hands. He kissed her, deep and possessive, and the bond between them flared so brightly that Elena felt as if her entire body was burning with it. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound washing over her like a wave, and when Alaric finally pulled back, Elena was breathless and dizzy with the intensity of it all. She had done it. She was Luna. She belonged. But the celebration was short-lived. A scream cut through the air, sharp and terrified, and the crowd fell silent. Elena turned, her heart lurching, and saw chaos erupting at the edge of the courtyard. Wolves were scattering, shouting, and in the center of the commotion stood Serafina. She had escaped. Somehow, impossibly, she had broken free from her cell and made her way to the ceremony. Her hair was wild, her dress torn and stained, and her eyes burned with a madness that made Elena's blood run cold. In her hand, she held a dagger, its blade glinting in the moonlight. "No!" Serafina screamed, her voice raw with fury. "This is not how it ends. I will not let you take everything from me." She lunged forward, moving with a speed born of desperation, and Elena realized with horror that Serafina was not coming for Alaric. She was coming for the pups. Lyra, Cassian, and Rowan had been standing near the front of the crowd, watched over by their nurses. But in the chaos, they had been separated, and now they stood alone, their small bodies frozen with fear as their mother bore down on them with murder in her eyes. Elena did not think. She did not hesitate. She threw herself forward, her body moving on instinct, and reached the pups just as Serafina's blade came down. The dagger sliced across Elena's shoulder, hot and sharp, but she ignored the pain and wrapped her arms around the pups, shielding them with her body. "You will not touch them!" Elena snarled, her voice filled with a fury she had never known she possessed. "You will not hurt them!" Serafina's face twisted with rage. "They are mine! They belong to me! And if I cannot have them, then no one will!" She raised the dagger again, aiming for Elena's back, but before the blade could fall, Alaric was there. He moved like lightning, his hand catching Serafina's wrist and twisting, the dagger clattering to the ground. His eyes blazed with a fury that made even Serafina flinch, and when he spoke, his voice was barely human. "You have lost," he said, his words filled with finality. "You have lost everything, and you will never harm my family again." He threw her to the ground, and the royal guards surrounded her, weapons drawn. Serafina tried to rise, tried to fight, but she was outnumbered and overpowered. She collapsed, sobbing, her composure completely shattered, and the guards dragged her away as she screamed and cursed and swore vengeance. But her threats were hollow now. She had nothing left. No power, no allies, no future. She was finished. Alaric turned to Elena, his expression shifting from fury to concern in an instant. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands gentle as he examined the wound on her shoulder. "You are hurt." "I am fine," Elena said, though her shoulder burned and blood was seeping through the fabric of her dress. "The pups, are they safe?" The 3 pups were still pressed against her, their small bodies trembling, but they were unharmed. Alaric gathered them into his arms, holding them close, and Elena saw tears glisten in his eyes. "You saved them," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You threw yourself in front of a blade to protect them." "Of course I did," Elena said, her voice soft. "They are my children. I would do anything for them." Alaric looked at her, and the love in his eyes was so overwhelming that Elena felt her breath catch. "You are everything," he said. "Everything I never knew I needed. Everything this kingdom needs. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." He kissed her again, gentle this time, and the crowd erupted in cheers once more. Healers rushed forward to tend to Elena's wound, and the pups were checked over by nurses. But through it all, Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her. It was over. Serafina was gone. The kingdom was safe, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. In the weeks that followed, Serafina was tried and convicted of treason, conspiracy, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes. The council debated her punishment for days, and in the end, they decided on banishment. She would be stripped of her title, her lands, her wealth, and cast out of Silvercrest forever. If she ever returned, she would be executed on sight. It was a mercy she did not deserve, but Alaric believed it was the right choice. Executing her would have created division, but banishment sent a clear message. Betray the kingdom, and you lose everything. There would be no second chances. Serafina was escorted to the border under heavy guard, and Elena watched from the palace walls as the woman who had once ruled as queen was cast out into the wilderness, alone and powerless. She felt no satisfaction in it, no sense of triumph, only a quiet relief that the nightmare was finally over. With Serafina gone, Elena threw herself into her new role as Luna. It was not easy. There were still wolves who doubted her, who whispered that an Omega had no place on the throne. But there were others, many others, who saw her for what she was. A woman who had survived impossible odds, who had shown compassion and courage when it mattered most, who had saved the royal heirs and exposed a traitor. Elena worked tirelessly to prove herself. She visited the villages, spoke with the people, listened to their concerns and their hopes. She worked with the council to reform laws that had long oppressed the lower-ranked wolves, ensuring that Omegas and others who had been marginalized were given a voice and a chance to rise. She opened the palace to those in need, creating shelters and healing centers for wolves who had nowhere else to go. And slowly, the kingdom began to change. The rigid hierarchy that had defined Silvercrest for generations began to soften, replaced by a system that valued compassion and strength in equal measure. It was not a perfect transformation, and there were those who resisted, but progress was being made. Through it all, Alaric stood by her side. He supported her, defended her, and loved her with a fierceness that never wavered. Together, they were stronger than either of them had ever been alone, and the bond between them only deepened with time. The pups thrived under their care. Lyra, Cassian, and Rowan grew into confident, happy children, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. They called Elena Mama without hesitation, and she cherished every moment with them, every laugh and tear and triumph. One evening, as the sun set over the palace and the sky turned shades of gold and crimson, Elena stood on the balcony of her chamber, watching the kingdom stretch out before her. She thought about the girl she had been, alone and frightened in a cold cabin, convinced that she would never be anything more than a servant, a tool, a burden. And she thought about the woman she had become, Luna of Silvercrest, mate to the Alpha King, mother to 3 beautiful children. A woman who had taken all the pain and suffering life had thrown at her and turned it into something powerful and good. Alaric joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How far I have come," Elena said softly. "How impossible all of this would have seemed a few months ago." "Not impossible," Alaric said. "Inevitable. You were always meant to be here, Elena. You were always meant to be mine." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at him with a smile. "And you were always meant to be mine." He kissed her, slow and sweet, and the bond between them hummed with contentment. They had faced darkness and deception, betrayal and violence, but they had survived. They had triumphed, and now, finally, they had peace. Below them, in the palace gardens, the pups played together, their laughter echoing through the evening air. And as Elena watched them, surrounded by the warmth of her mate and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, she realized that she had found something she had never dared to hope for. She had found home. She had found family. She had found love. And it was more than she ever could have dreamed. Months passed, and the kingdom of Silvercrest flourished under the new Luna's guidance. The reforms Elena had implemented began to take root, and the once rigid hierarchy started to shift, allowing wolves of all ranks to contribute and thrive. The people, who had initially been skeptical of an Omega Luna, came to respect and admire her for her strength, compassion, and unwavering dedication to the kingdom. Elena never forgot where she had come from. She never forgot the cold nights in her cabin, the hunger, the abuse, the loneliness. Those memories shaped her, reminded her of why she fought so hard to make Silvercrest a better place. And when she looked at the pups, now growing strong and confident under her care, she knew that every moment of suffering had been worth it. The bond between her and Alaric only deepened with time. They were partners in every sense of the word, ruling together, supporting each other, loving each other with a fierceness that inspired the entire kingdom. And when Elena discovered she was pregnant with their first child together, the joy that filled the palace was unlike anything Silvercrest had ever known. On the night of another full moon, Elena stood before the kingdom once more, this time with Alaric at her side and the pups gathered around them. The crowd that had once doubted her now cheered for her, their voices raised in celebration and loyalty. And as the moonlight bathed them all in its silvery glow, Elena felt the weight of her journey settle into something beautiful. She had been broken, abandoned, told she was worthless, but she had survived. She had risen, and now she stood as Luna of Silvercrest, loved and respected, surrounded by a family she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. As Alaric took her hand and the crowd roared their approval, Elena looked up at the moon and silently thanked the goddess for the path that had brought her here. It had been long and painful, filled with trials that had tested her in every way. But in the end, she had found her place. She had found her purpose, and she had found a love that would last forever. Elena Hart, once an invisible Omega, now stood as queen. And the kingdom she had saved would never forget the woman who had shown them that true strength came not from rank or power, but from the courage to love and the will to fight for what was right. The story of the Omega Luna would be told for generations, a tale of resilience and redemption, of pain transformed into power, of a woman who had defied every expectation and changed the fate of an entire kingdom. And it all began with 3 small pups, crying in the rain, and a woman brave enough to answer their call.